Welcome back. It's been fun, diving into development economics these last couple episodes. This time we're going even deeper, I think. We're going to really zoom in on what happens when countries industrialize later than those, early birds.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of a twist, isn't it? We always sort of focus on those pioneers. But the stories of the nations that came after, they're full of, unique challenges, and they have really different approaches.
Absolutely. And to make things even more interesting, you specifically asked that we take a look at this whole thing through the lens of Friedrich List. And you send over some, seriously dense academic papers and excerpts.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I think we pulled out some really intriguing stuff.
List was really way ahead of his time, especially in the 19th century when, everybody was so obsessed with free trade. He's out there saying, hey, wait a minute, sometimes countries need a more hands-on approach.
Okay, so let's break this down a little. So picture Europe, early 1800s. Britain's the economic rock star, right? Mm-hmm. Factories are just booming. Trade is exploding. But for other nations that are trying to catch up, List argued that simply opening up to free trade could, totally backfire.
Exactly. Their industries, they were, still babies, They were still in their infancy. Kind of like those fragile little seedlings, that need, a protected environment to grow. Pit them against, the mighty British industrial machine, and they get, totally trampled.
So List is saying, hold on, let's give these infant industries a fighting chance. They just need a bit of a boost, to become strong enough to actually compete on that world stage.
Precisely. And he had some pretty radical ideas about how to do this. He believed governments, they should actively shield these fledgling industries. Think tariffs on imports, strategic investments in infrastructure, even education systems that are geared towards those industrial skills that you need.
It's almost like a greenhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sheltering those young industries from the harsh elements of global competition until they're strong enough to thrive on their own. And Germany in the 19th century, they kind of became the poster child for this approach, didn't they?
Absolutely. It's a remarkable story of economic transformation. Germany back then, they weren't even a unified country. It was a bunch of fragmented states kind of lagging behind.
And then boom, they become this economic powerhouse. I gotta think List's ideas had a big role to play in that.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Historians and economists see a direct link between Germany's rise and these policies straight out of List's playbook. Protective tariffs, for example, those were a big deal. They made British imports way more expensive, which gave German businesses some breathing room.
And they went all in on infrastructure too, right? Railroads, a unified banking system, classic examples of the state setting the stage for economic growth.
Exactly. It wasn't just about, shielding those industries. It was about actively building a foundation for them to flourish. And they took education really seriously, too. They were making sure workers had the skills to thrive in these new industries. That's pure List, building a workforce that's ready for industrial might.
So Germany's the star student.
Yeah.
Putting List's theories into practice and getting straight A's in economic development. But they weren't the only ones taking notes, right? Other European countries were watching what was happening.
Oh, absolutely. France, Italy, they were both looking at Britain, trying to figure out how do we close this gap? And they each took kind of their own spin on this interventionist approach, shaped by, their own unique situations.
That makes sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, is it? You can't just copy and paste what worked in Germany and, expect the same results everywhere else.
Yeah. Exactly. This is where that concept of varieties of capitalism comes in. It's this idea that different countries with their own histories, their own institutions, they'll find their own unique paths to economic success, even if they're all drawing inspiration from the same source. It's interesting, how much List's thinking kind of echoes what we saw in countries like South Korea and Taiwan, in the late 20th century. They also, zeroed in on specific industries, often with a little helping hand from the government.
Yeah.
Before diving head first into global markets.
Almost like they were training for the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Building up their strength and skills at home before going head to head with the world champions.
Yeah. That's a great analogy, and it highlights like a really fundamental difference between that classic, laissez-faire approach and what List was advocating for. That traditional economic wisdom was all about open markets, free competition right from the start. List argued that sometimes you need like a bit of a buffer, a chance to actually get your footing before you can like really compete.
And this debate is still like raging on today, right? Even in places like the World Trade Organization, you see developing nations, fighting for more flexibility in the rules, a temporary shield to let their industries, mature a little.
Absolutely. It's a constant like tug of war in these global trade talks.
Yeah.
Developed nations they're often pushing for these like wide open markets and free trade while developing nations argue that a like level playing field sometimes requires a bit of a head start.
So where does this leave us in terms of understanding late industrialization? It feels like it's not just some like historical curiosity. It's a dynamic process. It's still like very much unfolding right now.
That's a crucial point. And what's really important to remember is that List never intended, for his ideas to be this like rigid blueprint. He knew there wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It was more about, providing a framework for strategic thinking about economic development.
So it's about taking those core principles, like protecting infant industries, making those smart investments, focusing on skills and technology, and then figuring out how to actually apply them in the unique context of a particular country or region.
Exactly. And that's where it gets like really exciting, because even when those like fundamental principles are the same, the way they're put into practice can look totally different.
Can you give us like an example? How did this play out differently in, say, France versus Germany? I mean, they both embraced these interventionist policies, but I imagine they went about it in their own ways.
Well, France, with its long history of centralized power, they tended to take a more top-down approach. The state was very heavily involved in directing investments and picking which industries to champion.
So it's like the French government was the conductor of an orchestra, like deciding which instruments get the spotlight and how how the whole symphony comes together.
Yeah, that's a perfect image. Germany, on the other hand, they developed a more like collaborative system, often involving close partnerships between the government, industry groups, even like labor unions.
So it's less about a conductor and more like a jazz ensemble. Where everyone's kind of like improvising and contributing their expertise to create something truly unique.
That's a great way to put it. And these differences, they weren't just superficial. I mean, they reflected like these deep-seated institutional distinctions that shaped each country's path to development.
And this takes us right back to that varieties of capitalism idea, doesn't it? The idea that there are multiple routes to economic success, each one shaped by a country's unique institutions and historical context.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that we shouldn't be searching for this single, correct model of development. What works brilliantly in one place might like totally flop in another.
So even though List gives us these like really compelling ideas, he's not handing us some kind of magic formula. It's still up to each nation to chart its own course.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this, this whole area of study so fascinating. It's not just about, crunching numbers or applying theories. It's about understanding how history, institutions, even culture, like how they all intertwine, to influence how societies create and distribute wealth.
It sounds like there's a human element to it, like a spark of creativity that drives this whole process of development.
You're right, and I think List, with his emphasis on national ambition and the pursuit of economic power, I think he really understood that.
Well,
He saw industrialization not just as an economic process, but almost as this like nation-building project.
Yeah, it's about like channeling the collective energy and the talents of of a whole society, and then like focusing them towards this shared goal. It's pretty inspiring when you think about it.
It really is, and that's why it's so crucial to understand the different strategies that countries have used to achieve this.
Yeah, because by studying these historical examples,
Yeah.
we gain these valuable insights into what works, what doesn't, and maybe most importantly, why.
Precisely. And those insights can help us, navigate the complexities of economic development in the 21st century.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about lists, ideas, and their historical context, which is fascinating in its own right. But I kind of want to bring us back to the present. How does all this connect to your initial request to understand late industrialization through this particular lens?
That's a great question. I think it's crucial to recognize that late industrialization isn't just a phase that countries go through, and then it's over. It's an ongoing challenge, It's constantly evolving as the global economic landscape shifts.
So it's not like you hit a finish line and declare, okay, we're industrialized, time to relax. It's a continuous process of adaptation and innovation.
Exactly, and List's emphasis on strategic thinking and proactive policies, that might be even more relevant, even more relevant today than it was back, in the 19th century.
What makes you say that?
Well, think about the breakneck speed of technological change, the rise of those really intricate global value chains, the sheer complexity, of the global economy. It's a far more dynamic and interconnected world than the one List was writing in,
So those same principles of nurturing industries, investing wisely, and moving up that value chain. They still apply, but the game has changed dramatically.
Absolutely. Just copying what 19th century Germany did or what 20th century South Korea did. That won't cut it anymore.
It's about really grasping those core principles, understanding the underlying logic, and then adapting them to to the unique challenges of the 21st century.
Right, and that requires a deep understanding of how those principles have played out in different contexts.
Which is exactly what we've been doing. In this deep dive, we've looked at Germany, France, Italy. We even touched on some examples, from Asia.
And by doing so, I think we've started to uncover some of those key insights you were looking for.
Insights that can help us understand not just historical patterns of development, but also the challenges and opportunities facing developing nations today.
Exactly, and that's where the whole idea of global value chains, that becomes particularly relevant.
You mentioned earlier how some Asian apparel manufacturers have managed to climb that value chain ladder, going from just basic assembly to handling the whole production process. Can you walk us through how that actually happened?
Yeah, it's a really remarkable story, actually. Think back to the early days of garment production in places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea. They were mostly doing really simple sewing work, right? Putting clothes together based on designs that were sent over by Western brands. They weren't really involved in the creative or the high profit parts of the business.
So they're essentially cogs in this giant machine, following instructions, but not really contributing much to the design or the brand value.
Exactly. But over time, something really interesting happened. These Asian manufacturers, they started investing in their own skills, their technology, design capabilities. They also got smarter about building relationships with Western buyers, learning more about consumer tastes and market trends.
So they were evolving beyond just being seamstresses and tailors. They were becoming problem solvers, innovators, even trendsetters in their own right.
Yeah, you got it. And as they gained experience and know-how, they were able to take on increasingly complex tasks. Instead of just stitching garments, they started offering what's called full package production.
What does that entail exactly?
It means they became these one-stop shops. Handling everything from, sourcing fabrics to managing that whole, production process, all the way to quality control and shipping. This gave them, much more control over that value chain and a bigger slice of the profits too.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah.
They went from being low-cost subcontractors to running their own, sophisticated operations, almost like mini fashion empires.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of what, of what List was getting at. He believed that, that nations should constantly be pushing to move up that value chain, to become more, more sophisticated and competitive. And this evolution in the Asian apparel industry, I mean, it's a perfect illustration of that principle in action.
It shows that even in our globalized world where production is like scattered across continents, there's still space for strategic economic thinking. Countries, they can chart their own course, and really take control of their economic destiny.
Yeah, it's not about, passively accepting your place in the global pecking order. It's about, pushing boundaries, aiming higher, constantly striving for something more.
It's almost like an economic version of personal growth, always learning, always evolving to reach your full potential.
I love that analogy. It reminds us that economic development isn't just about, these cold, hard numbers. It's about ambition, creativity, and challenging that status quo.
And that sends a really powerful message, doesn't it? It means that even countries that industrialize later, those who might start out with a disadvantage, I mean, they still have the potential to become major players on the world stage.
Absolutely. And by studying the strategies and principles that have driven successful late industrialization, I mean, we can better equip ourselves to tackle the challenges and seize the opportunities of the 21st century.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've journeyed from the history of economic thought to the intricacies of global value chains, and I think we've gained a much deeper understanding of how late industrialization works, both historically and in today's world.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's most striking is how these historical examples, even those from centuries ago, I mean, they still hold like really valuable lessons for us today.
It's like peering through, a time-lapse lens.
Yeah.
Witnessing how, economic ideas and strategies have morphed and adapted, yet, how certain fundamental principles have really stood the test of time.
Exactly. And as we've seen, understanding those enduring principles is key to making sense of this, complex and constantly shifting landscape of development economics.
So as we wrap up here, what's the one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to ponder after this deep dive?
I'd say it's this. Late industrialization isn't, it isn't this passive process where you just sit back and wait for things to happen. It's about, making bold choices, nurturing industries, investing wisely, and continuously pushing to climb that value chain in the global economy. Mm-hmm. There's no guaranteed formula for success, but history has shown us that it is possible to defy the odds and achieve like truly remarkable economic transformation.
And as we've discussed, Friedrich List with his with his emphasis on national ambition and strategic economic thinking, I mean, he offers a really powerful framework for understanding how those transformations can actually unfold.
He certainly does. We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas on your own, to delve deeper into specific case studies, and to think critically about how these principles might be applied to to the challenges of the 21st century.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and equipped you with new ways of thinking about the fascinating world of economic development. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.